basically Movimiento, Jaguar, Despierto. It means awoken Jaguar movement. So take the stage.
Thank you. No, I'm going to talk from here actually.
Tan rebelde.
I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce to you who we are. MJD, Movimiento Jaguar Despierto, or the Awoken Jaguar movement, you could say is a consolidation of 6 years of experimenting and looking for young people within the Nicantlaka community in London who feel a real desire for change. This family, MJD, is made up of 7 people who come from what is known as Latin America. We represent various regions in the area, but we don't limit ourselves to representing those regions. We declare allegiance to our entire continent, from north to south. We are one people. We are Nicantlaka, which means we, the people of the land. And we, Amaru, Auca, Alejandra, Juana, Diego, Carlitos, and myself, prefer to call our beautiful land Abyayala or Tawantinsuyu. These were the original names our ancestors used, and they depict a land fully developed in its maturity. This was and is the case. We were not discovered, we were invaded.
Yes. That's true.
Yes.
We live in a world governed by a series of technocratic governments who answer not to the needs of the people, but rather to the needs of parasitic capitalism. This is a fact. Their attempt at politics and democracy centered around capital can never truly resemble the real needs of society. It's the reason why you have a fiery trade unionist who denouncing government in the morning, who blames the poor for his struggle at night. Or why you have 500,000 Nicantlaka in the UK divided to the point that a so-called Colombian feels he has the legitimacy to insult a Bolivian by calling him an Indio. It's this sort of thinking that has dominated our continent for the last 500 years. And we have seen in those 500 years how year after year, layer after layer of colonial screens are placed over our eyes. That being said, you can feel that the world is at a point where people are realizing that this sort of living is not feasible. It's too materialistic. It has no transcendence. It's killing us.
Yep.
It cannot be this way. It cannot be this way because we still have dictators, descendants of the first colonizers who still carry out massive violations of human rights. There is still uncontrolled corruption because of capitalism. And this all still seems to lead to a complete disregard towards life in our continent. To give you an example, we can talk about the colonial state of Colombia. Deemed a fast-growing economy by orthodox neoliberal economic indices, the third largest in Tawantinsuyu, they say, is a 21st century miracle. However, the fact remains that capital growth doesn't translate into the well-being of the majority. Corruption occurs at every level of society in Colombia. In fact, the biggest case of corruption in the last 30 years has recently been exposed. More capital will only mean more corruption in a country that has seen 500 years of colonial rule, 60 years of internal war, 220,000 dead, 8 million internally displaced, and 5 million who constitute the diaspora. Our people can tell you that the peace process being carried out in Colombia at the moment can and should be the basis on which we can build a new Colombia.
Woo!
However, what many in government repeatedly and bizarrely seem to be unable to realize is that peace can never actually be feasible until the conditions for peace are created.
Exactly.
When the US State Department recently voiced their worries about Colombia regarding impunity, the inefficiency of the judiciary, forced displacement, corruption, social discrimination, and the actions of illegal armed groups, they reminded us that these aren't conditions for peace.
No.
The US State Department knows it very well, which is why it's worked so hard in creating these very conditions. It's understandable. We can't have one of the fastest growing economies in Tawantinsuyu actually providing conditions that promote the well-being of our people. Then we would have examples like Venezuela, we would have examples like Ecuador and Bolivia, where people might actually realize that there is another way.
Yep.
The US State Department cannot possibly allow this to happen, and everybody here knows they will use any means possible to sabotage these efforts. They'll do so because this scenario might create a more equal interpretation of the world, and worse yet, it might spread. And this is bad for business. Chomsky called it the threat of the good example. Now I could go on considering this obviously evil threat, but I think our speakers will elaborate in much more detail the internal workings of this evil. We welcome this process of change, of decolonization, but we are fully aware that if we don't embrace it, then the opportunity will pass and a new, unthinkable, more subtle and more controlling wave of parasitic capitalist domination might develop. The very thought of this makes the hair on the back of our neck stand up. So we take energy, inspiration, and strength by referring to the teachings of our ancestors.
Yeah.
Woo!
That's true.
About 5,000 years ago, the first known records of our ancient history came into being in the form of the Caral super civilization. Our people of Caral developed independently and gave way for a complex and diverse array of civilizations that grew strong over the next 4,500 years. The remains of our ancient cultures are still alive and practiced actively by about 30 million Nicantlaka. However, they are, as they have been for the past 500 years, in constant danger from Western superpowers. They are now at the point of wreaking havoc through pharmaceutical endeavors, but they have for so long pillaged the wealth of our land. The worst genocide in the history of mankind, which saw 95% of our race wiped from the face of the earth, wasn't enough to destroy us completely. We, the descendants of the 5% that survived, seek to rid ourselves and our people completely of all Western capitalist influence.
Yes.
From the Mapuche in Chile, the Quechua Aymara in Bolivia, the Maya in Mexico, to the Mam in Guatemala, and the Nahua in El Salvador, the sentiment is uniform in nature. We, the original people of this beautiful land, come from the land, and we demand the right to be able to grow in our land without fear of it being taken from us.
Woo!
It is from this original organized civilization and its subsequent development what we look to when we are corrupted by the capitalist Western view of the world. It is an active and developing exercise, and it's what drives all of our actions.
Exactly.
Yes.
Though the complex array of cultures that flourish differ in many aspects within their evolution, there are some universal tendencies which, if applied, would change the very nature of our existence. The study of nature shows us that there exists a natural order to the world which is governed by laws. Man discovers such laws in the constant examination and comparing of that which occurs around him. Our people understood the need to live their lives in this constant examination and combine their study and practice. Everything is connected. The cosmos, our body, and nature. It was being conscious of this dynamic relation that permitted our people to live in harmony with their surroundings. Their understanding permitted them to develop complex societal systems where people never went hungry. But people never acted on individual interests and always sought to make laws that took into consideration the opinion of all of the members of the group. Indigenous democracy, real democracy, works that way, with the voice and opinion of everyone, no matter how long it takes. And thus, we are at the beginning of our journey, for finding out about the rich wealth of knowledge, culture, and tradition that still reverberates in our land. We understand the importance of this, which is why it's a keystone for our work. It is inevitably the driving force behind it, and the more we learn, the more we grow. We can see our inherited identity is being lost in the confines of capitalist Western thought and tradition. Identity is both inherited and acquired. And it is only through committing yourself to reviving your inherited identity that you will begin to comprehend your true identity. And for this, there is only one path: education. Education is a means of forming and interpreting and understanding your identity. Through education, we will learn about ourselves. When we discover new realities through reading, when we decipher new ways of life through experience, we will become conscious of the need for growth in body, mind, and spirit. Education is a reciprocal dynamic where practice and theory are constant. And your growing as a person depends heavily on how you apply what you learn to your own life. Institutionalized academic teaching is incredibly selective, and with it we can only hope to achieve but a little of the potential of our minds. The selective, discriminative, and idealized information we are receiving is simply part of a larger discourse designed to maintain us essentially uneducated.
Yes.
Education is not only essential because it will provide us with the necessary tools to combat the current ways of thinking, but through it, we will discover what it means to liberate our minds and what it means to unite in thoughts. At MJD, we know that education is more than the simple transfer of knowledge. It is a process by which you are able to understand the bigger processes that occur in our world.